Good evening and welcome to the Central Bank Towers in downtown Port of Spain and CTV and Talk City 91.1 FM's live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. I'm Paul Richards and we're really happy to have you with us. The budget title was Stimulating Growth and Generating Prosperity as we explore Budget 2013. This past Monday, Senator the Honorable Larry Howai presented his maiden budget in which there was a projection of the following: total revenue, $50.736 billion. Oil revenue, $20.038 billion. Non-oil revenue, $30.698 billion. The total expenditure net of capital repayments and sinking fund contribution was $58.405 billion. The Honorable Minister predicted a deficit of $7.669 billion, or 4.6% of gross domestic product. This evening on CTV and Caribbean New Media Group, we explore Budget 2013. Education and training received the highest portion of the budget with $9,149.1 million. Health, $5,108.7 million. National security, $5,503.7 billion. Public utilities, $3,783.1 million. Housing, $3,503.7 million, and the list goes on and on. Our panelists include the Honorable Minister himself, Senator the Honorable Larry Howai, the Minister of Finance and the Economy, and we'll be joined on set later on by the Minister of Trade and Industry and Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Vasant Bharath. Our panelists, our moderators include this evening Senior Economist, Republic Bank Economy Intelligence Unit, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, and CNMG's own Jesse Mayvento. We'll be taking your calls later on at 627-3760. It's over now to our moderator, CNMG's own Jesse Mayvento.
Good evening to you, Trinidad and Tobago, and thank you for joining us for what promises to be a very special evening, a very educational evening, as we have the finance ministers in with us, sharing the philosophy as well as some of the facts and figures behind Budget Presentation 2012-2013. I want to introduce you to my co-moderator, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, Senior Economist at Republic Bank, and we are very pleased to have on set with us at this point the Honorable Senator Larry Howai, Minister of Finance. Minister, good evening to you.
Good evening, Jessime, and good evening to all the viewers and everyone here in the audience.
Minister, let's start with the overarching vision behind the budget that you presented to us. What was the philosophy guiding you? What were some of the concerns that you sought to address in this budget in particular?
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's, I don't have a particular, whether it's a liberal or conservative philosophy. I was guided by what I thought was practical in the circumstances, what was pragmatic, what would make the most sense to Trinidad and Tobago. And what I did is I first of all started by looking at what was our current circumstance. And as I said in the budget speech, our current circumstance is one where we have strong foreign exchange earnings. We have an economy that has started to grow. We expect to show 1.2% growth this year. We have a well-educated, strong labor force. We have a very vibrant private sector. We have low debt to GDP levels, so that we had the makings of us being able to begin to grow the economy. So my first thought was, how could we show growth this year and continue the momentum and add a further boost to the momentum that we are seeing in terms of the 1.2% growth that we expect to show this year. So what I did is I then said, well, what are the things that we need to focus on? And I said, well, the first thing is that we would need to determine how we can grow revenues in order to stimulate the growth in income and stimulate the growth of the economy. Secondly, how we control expenditure. And thirdly, how we can build competitiveness for our economy by introducing the right types of reforms. So those are some of the thinking that went into the background of crafting the budget this year.
There are some analysts and experts who have expressed concern with some of the figures. The arithmetic doesn't seem to be adding up for them, and Dr. Ramkissoon and I were speaking about it before we came down, and he had a couple of points that he wanted some clarification on. Dr. Ramkissoon.
Yeah, good afternoon, Minister. Good afternoon, Jesse, audience. Minister, I think the budget was very much on target in terms of your signaling that growth was in fact the major driver or what I think the economy needs, incentives, stimulus, given some 3 years of negative growth. So I think the budget was very much on target. But I'm very much interested, Minister, in the 1.2% growth that is estimated. We know that it is an estimate because we are now in October, and those figures might have been done perhaps by the end of June. How strongly do you feel that we are going to have growth this year, Minister?
Yeah, well, actually, it's the momentum that I'm seeing. For example, in the first quarter of this year, it was about 0. By the second quarter, we were starting to see the numbers that came in were showing that we were about 1. And coming towards the end of the third quarter, some of the rough estimates we had suggested it would be closer to 1.2. So what you're seeing is a gradual rolling momentum taking place in the economy. And so therefore we felt fairly comfortable about using the 1.2% figure based on that momentum that we were seeing taking place in the economy.
Even, Minister, given the negative growth in the first quarter, possibly the second, is there any particular thing in the second half of the year that you see that you think will encourage that growth?
Yeah, what we were seeing is that particularly the non-energy sector was starting to grow strongly.
Okay.
Finance and distribution. Construction is still anemic. Energy has been affected by the work that is being done, repairs and maintenance work that is being done, particularly offshore by some of the big producers, which has affected the output into the downstream sector. So that the downstream sector is running about 5% below last year. Fortunately, what is happening is that they have relatively good prices internationally now for things like methanol and ammonia. And therefore, the effect is somewhat mitigated. But certainly in a number of other sectors, we're seeing the distribution and retail trades, for example, we're starting to see relatively stronger performance in those sectors. So we were very clear that from the numbers that we were seeing, that there's a momentum heading towards growth this year, continuing momentum towards growth.
In terms of figures, one of the issues that the analysts have been bringing up is a clarification on the figure involving the subsidies and transfers. Dr. Akisu?
Yes. Minister, you have again correctly targeted the reduction of subsidies and transfers going forward because of the size of subsidies and transfers in the budget, and as reflected in the various budget documents, these subsidies and transfers have been high and continue to grow. You have indicated that we need to adjust them, we need to bring them down if we are not to, or if we are to have proper financial management. But when we look in the budget speech itself, we notice that there is a figure of 20% subsidies and transfers, and it doesn't seem to gel with some figures that we see in the review of the economy for 2012. Do you care to explain that 20%?
I have to say that there was a typographical in the document, in the actual budget document itself. The sentence should have read subsidies and transfers and social programs, the latter of which amount to 20%.
I see.
So it was the social programs piece of it that refers to the 20% and not the total of subsidies, transfers, and social programs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that clarification, Minister.
One of the big ticket items grabbing everyone's attention from this budget presentation, Minister, has to do with the removal of value-added tax on certain food items, and you underscore that this is going to be a temporary measure. The question is, how temporary is that temporary?
Yes, well, the Prime Minister indicated that she would establish a committee which would do two things. Is one, look at the issue of what would be included, because she said that it excluded luxury items. So I suppose certain caviar might be excluded, So we had to go through, that committee will have to go through and determine which are the items that would be added to the list that would be zero rated for VAT. And secondly, would look at, in the context of some of the other programs that we'd want to do, and particularly the other commitments that we have, how best we would be able to manage the whole process of dealing with the competing priorities that we're faced with. And therefore, I expect that the time frame for that, the recommendation would come from that committee to the Prime Minister.
Just to tack on to that question, the issue of changing consumption patterns and bringing about cultural change in local tastes. Is that some of the thinking behind the move that was made in this regard? And how does that link with the Buy Local campaign that was established by the Food Production Ministry late last year, earlier this year? Is this a measure to support that campaign? Will even our local food processors benefit as a result of the removal of VAT on some of the processed foods?
Yeah.
Multiple questions there, but all connected.
Yeah. Well, certainly we expect that this committee that has been established will look at those interrelationships and determine which are the things that will be affected. I think the intention of the Prime Minister is to ensure that the net is as broad as possible in terms of what is allowed, because her immediate intention is to ensure that the impact of high food prices is mitigated and is felt by the broadest segment of the population as possible. So the intention was really to deal with that specific aspect of our inflation. As you know, apart from food inflation, the rest of the basket carries a rate of inflation closer to like 4%, as opposed to the 7 and 8% sometimes that you hear. And the big part of that is adding to it is really the food inflation. So it was an executive attempt and a direct and a clear line of leadership being demonstrated by the Prime Minister that, I will deal with this matter. This is the decision that we are going with. This is what we're going to do. And I recognize it will have some knock-on effects. So I need this committee to look at it and let me know where we need to draw the line and what is the best arrangement to put in place as far as in terms of the balance that we need to keep between those other, particularly in the manufacturing sector, who will be affected by decisions that are being made here.
When Dr. Rapkissoon and I were doing our prep for this evening, one of the things we were looking at was a number of incentives that you'd included in this particular document, adding on to some of the other incentives to generate investment and economic activity in the previous budgets that were presented. Dr. Rapkissoon?
Yes, I still want to talk a bit, Minister, about the impact of that removal from some items in what is considered food. Firstly, can you give us an idea as to the loss in revenue that the government is going to sustain as a result of that in the context of the budget and trying to keep expenditure within control? And secondly, to what extent would that measure negatively impact domestic agriculture?
Okay, the rough estimates that we got, which our technical staff did, and it depends on certain assumptions regarding buying patterns and so on, subsequent to the removal of the VAT. But the estimates that were done provided a figure of 400 million.
Okay.
That number we expect to recoup by way of reduced transfers to state enterprises, and as well increased dividends from state enterprises, so that the expectation is that that will be covered through that mechanism. And we've already identified the specific sources which would allow us to cover that, what is likely to come from there. I think that figure is probably an upper end of the figure. I am thinking it might be a little bit lower, but I think it's better to be conservative and use the larger number and determine how best we're going to cover it.
Yes.
One of the things that we definitely are going to do coming out of this is to look at what are the things that we can do to stimulate local agricultural production. And, perhaps, the Minister of Trade and Industry and who is also the Minister in the Ministry of Finance was formerly the Minister of Agriculture. And he has some stories about what was actually done while he was in that ministry. And what I would suggest is perhaps when he comes on, we could speak a lot more to some of the initiatives that he had already started while he was Minister of Agriculture, which we expect to lead to us being able to achieve the targets that we want to achieve. But what I would say specifically in relation to answer the question is that we do intend to consider a number of other incentives that we would provide to the farmers in order to ensure that we bring them as quickly as possible up to the level that would allow them to compete effectively with the price of imported food.
We've got just a couple of minutes before we go to the break. Dr. Ramkissoon?
Minister, if we are to shift a bit to the construction sector, and the budget has quite a number of incentives that are intended to generate economic activity in that sector, which in fact is supposed to be highly labor intensive and therefore which is going to create employment. How soon do you see the private sector taking up those incentives to begin construction?
Yeah. A big part of it is how quickly approvals can be received. What our intention is to set up a special committee, a team from the various organizations, WASA, Town and Country Planning, and so on, which we will have chaired by someone from the Ministry of Finance. And we will use that team to fast-track a number of the proposals that will be coming through so that we could speed up that approval process, because, as you know, that approval process can take as much as 12 months at time.
Sure.
And the impact of that would be that the year would be finished before we start to see any activity taking place. So our intention is to build a mechanism during the course of the next month or so, and to communicate out to the private sector to indicate how that process would work. Because my intention is that certainly within the next 6 months to start to see mobilization taking place within the construction sector for some of these projects that we've identified.
Okay.
We are here at the Ministry of Finance and Economy for the post-budget forum featuring the finance minister, Senator the Honorable Larry Howai. You'll be joined in a little bit by Minister in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Vasant Parath. Right after this, let's go back to Paul.
Yes, we're live from downtown Port of Spain with the Ministry of Finance and Economy Post-Budget Forum 2013. We will take a short break and come back with more. And later on this evening, we're going to be opening phone line 627-3760. You can also text us, the keyword being forum, type your question and or comment and send everything to 4913. We come back with more after this break. Welcome back to CTV and Talk City 91.1's live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. We're live from downtown Port of Spain, and we will be fielding questions from our live audience on hand here. We've been joined on set by Minister of Trade and Industry and Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Vasant Parath. Still on set with us is the Honorable Senator Larry Howai, and Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon is over now to CNMG's Jesse Maybento.
Thanks for staying with us here on CTV and Talk City 91.1 FM. Just before we took the break, we began drilling into some of the incentives that have been created in Budget 2012-2013. Senator the Honorable Larry Howai speaking to some of the incentives in the construction sector, but a perusal of the document would show you that right across all sectors of the economy, government has added to some incentives that were created before to get things started. It's about stimulus, some austerity, but it's mainly about stimulus in this budget. Minister of Trade and Industry and also Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Minister Parath, in terms of the stimulus, in your area of responsibility. How soon do you expect your stakeholders to begin to take advantage of these opportunities?
Thank you, Jessamine. Well, before I answer, let me take this opportunity to congratulate Minister Hawaii on presenting his first budget speech to the nation. We've been very fortunate in that we've had two ministers of finance during very turbulent times in Trinidad and Tobago who've managed to bring us through where many other countries that were similarly circumstanced have not been able to get through with flying colors. And Minister Hawaii was able to chart for you how strong our reserves are and our foreign exchange position. We did all of that whilst, these two ministers of finance did all of that whilst making sure that unemployment fell, poverty fell. So we've been very fortunate. So I want to publicly congratulate Minister on really presenting a budget now that I think we're over the hump, and a budget now that really deals with stimulating growth and generating prosperity for all, which is actually a pillar on which the People's Partnership came into government, prosperity for all. But more specifically, coming to the Ministry of Trade and Industry, one of the driving factors in any success of any sector or any industry or any economy is competitiveness, particularly in today's environment where genuinely people can do business anywhere in the world they want to. I could sit, or you can sit behind a computer screen in Woodbrook and conduct business in China. The revelation of technology, we can do almost anything. So it's very important that we can attract people, whether they're locals or foreign direct investment to Trinidad, by creating that competitive environment. Unfortunately, currently we rank at number 84 in the world as far as competitiveness is concerned. And we rank at number 84 in the world because we have several indicators that point to the fact that we're not doing the right thing. Many of those indicators, one of those important indicators is the ease of doing business in Trinidad and Tobago, where we rank at number 68. And when you drill down into those indicators, you find that, as Minister Hawaii just said, construction permits take 297 days to get in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's the WASA and the TSEC and so on. Registering a business takes 43 days, and we are at number 74th in the world. Well, we recently took a note to the Cabinet to reduce those 43 days down to a maximum of 3 days. So anyone can now register from the end of October of this year, can now register a business in Trinidad and Tobago, incorporated, get a name, and start trading within 3 days of all of that, from 43 days. Customs and Excise, it takes close to 19 days to clear a container, between 14 and 19 days to clear a container, either in or out of Trinidad and Tobago. I have a commitment from, and I say publicly, I have a commitment from the Comptroller of Customs and Excise, that once the Asecutor system and the single electronic window are integrated, which we've been attempting as a country to do for many years, and that will be done by the end of October again this year, 31st of October, in a few days. Clearing a container, unless there are issues with regard to security, will now be cleared within 24 hours. So those are some of the things that we're tackling that will move us up the ladder as far as ease of doing business is concerned. And there are many others that we need to tackle. So we've got to do that first before we can talk about the sectors we want to really resuscitate or we want to put focus on. But having done that, side by side, concurrently, we've identified several sectors where we want to focus. And one of the things about the budget, and one of the things that the government has embarked upon in the last few months is focus. Whether it's focused expenditure with regard to the reform agenda, or whether it's focused spending as far as revenue generating is concerned, we're very focused on where we put our taxpayers' money. So we're looking at certain sectors that we've identified. We've pulled it from 25, 30, 40 sectors that we've been concentrating on traditionally all over the place, down to 5 or 6 main sectors. Financial services, ICT. ICT, of course, is linked to financial services because you require that continuous stream of tertiary graduates and so on to get into to use financial services. Let me just track back to financial services. Minister Hawaii would have mentioned that we've had our first major investor in the financial services very recently, where a large financial institution has decided to place their back office in Trinidad and Tobago with an investment of $100 million with the employment of 200 people. And I'm now pursuing 2 other such institutions to do exactly the same thing. So we're starting a new industry from scratch, something that has not existed before. I mentioned the ICT. Well, of course, tourism. We've invested heavily in the tourism sector in Tobago with our guarantee scheme loan for small hotels below 50 rooms. We have the creative industries, which we just talked about. Now, if anyone is involved in the creative industry, for the first time you will see that there are genuine incentives given to the creative industries. Film in particular, where we've given 150% tax breaks to those who invest up to a maximum of $3 million US. We've increased that from $2 million US. We've given incentives, tax incentives, and removal of VAT on film and equipment related to the creative sector. Fashion is the same. We're doing exactly the same thing for fashion and for entertainment. Agriculture, we spoke about that. Thankfully, I come from the belly of the agricultural sector, and I see many of my old friends from the agriculture sector here. So I understand very clearly the business opportunities available in agriculture, the marine industry, the maritime industry. We have thousands of yachts that come to Trinidad on an annual basis simply because we have a sheltered harbor. And what we want to do is to formalize and develop a structure so that they can be serviced. We can provide maintenance, we can provide service for them.
Minister, if
yes.
I may.
And then, of course, the energy services is another.
We've got to take a
if I
quick
may.
break very, very quickly, and we will continue our discussion with both ministers, as well as my co-moderator, Ronald Ramkissoon. Paul, it's over to you.
It's CTV and CNMG's live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. We'll take a short break and come back with more right here from the Financial Towers. This is the Caribbean Media Group, the state media of Trinidad Tobago, bringing you live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. The title of 2013's budget, Stimulating Growth and Generating Prosperity. We have a live audience and a site here in downtown Port of Spain, comprising of NGOs, civil society groups, and several other interest groups, which will be posting questions to our panel, which includes Finance Minister, Senator the Honorable Larry Hawaii. Also on set with us is the Minister of Trade and Industry and Minister of State in the Ministry of Finance, the Honorable Vasant Barat, and also our moderators, Senior Economist with Republic Bank's Economic Intelligence Unit, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, and CNMG's very own Jessie May-Vento.
Thank you, Paul, and welcome back to a very interesting session with our ministers this afternoon. We started to drill down into some of the figures relating to the incentives to stimulate growth in different sectors of the economy. Dr. Ramkissoon.
Yes, Minister, we were talking a while ago about the saying in policy circles that the largest incentive is the removal of disincentives. Very often the Minister of Finance would have to give certain incentives to get things done, and there are a number of incentives across several sectors in the budget. However, for many reasons and for many years, we have found that these incentives have not delivered. They have not encouraged faster growth, say manufacturing, agriculture is a prime example. And therefore, there seems to be need for a greater focus on removing disincentives rather than giving incentives. And can you tell us what are some of the things that are being done to remove some of the disincentives to investment across the board?
And what you've just stated is absolutely true. In fact, in the very first meeting that I had with the TTMA, when post-meeting they came to me and said, Minister, we're not looking for any more incentives. We just want you to clear the pathway for us to be able to get on and do business. And that's actually what we've been doing in the last 2.5 months. To give you an example, 2.5 months ago, InvestTT was one of 13 organizations in Trinidad and Tobago across 3 ministries that was responsible for trade facilitation and promotion in Trinidad and Tobago. So if an investor came to Trinidad and Tobago, they were totally confused as to where to go, who to speak to, what incentives were available, what was the marketing message that Trinidad and Tobago had to sell itself. We've now reduced that down to one organization. InvestTT will be the sole port of call for any investor, local or foreign, coming to Trinidad and Tobago. InvestTT also will be responsible at the front end for getting all of these approvals that currently an investor has to go around physically to each of these organizations like WASA, TNTech, Town and Country to get. So InvestTT is going to hold your hand through that system to a particular point. If it's an energy investment thereafter, it goes after the Ministry of Energy, but InvestTT will keep a track of it.
But how is that different from the one-stop shop that we used to have, Minister?
Well, I'm not sure if that existed in the 1980s as you're talking about. What I'm saying is that we have a model now that we've started which will work. That's one organization, InvestTT. I mentioned earlier on the Customs and Excise. Now that Customs and Excise will be the Asecura system that has been around since I was on the TTMA board back in the late 80s and has had several iterations. Now we're going to have a situation where Asecura system is going to be linked and integrated with a single electronic window by the end of October, which will now seamlessly create a situation where all documents will be in and out of the system within 24 hours. So we have that bureaucracy cleared as well. Chemistry, food and drug is another area that creates major problems for importers into Trinidad and Tobago. It's also created some diplomatic incidents with Jamaica and Barbados, with the Patties War and the dairy from Pine Hill and so on. I have a note before Cabinet as we speak to take the Chemistry, Food and Drug Division out of the Ministry of Health, place it under the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Investments, and to separate the standard setting part of chemistry, food and drugs and put it with the national standards setting body, which is the Trinidad and Tobago Bureau of Standards. So you have one set of standards setting body across the country. So again, you don't have duplication and triplication of effort, but more importantly, you don't have several different interpretations of standards, which is what happens. And when you allow officers of any organization to use that level of discretion, it creates the flexibilities that we know exist within all of these systems to create black holes and to keep to enable the bureaucracy to survive.
And which reminds us of in the past there have been several changes. Institutions have been moved from one ministry to the next, but they have all been within the public service. Is there something that is going to be different in terms of the performance of the public sector in delivering services to the private sector to get investment going?
Well, I think the message is now different. The messengers are now completely different. Both Minister Howe and I come from the private sector. We have a different perspective on how things should be run. Just to give you an example, I met with the Board of National Flour Mills very recently, an organization that we can't say is the most efficiently run. Their stock price is, I think, around about 68 cents, when it ought to be, based on their asset value, somewhere around about $20 at a breakup value. And I met with them very recently, and I want to tell you that I think this is probably, I'm not sure if it's a historic signing or not, but certainly it's very rare that the SWWTU signed an agreement with the management of National Flour Mills to accept 8%, which is lower than the 9%, but also to accept an incentive based on productivity and efficiency. So they will be incentivized based on productivity and efficiency on the next round of
Can that be spread across?
So this is the type of thinking that we're trying to roll out and to cultivate across the public sector. But it starts one at a time, and we've got to use those as the models to roll out across the others.
Okay. We have members of civil society and other civil society organizations, NGOs and so on with us here this evening, who will be putting their questions to the ministers who are in with us. In terms of the incentives question, there are some very interesting questions for those involved in the area of real estate, particularly for the housing ministry. And one of the concerns, though, is that there may need to be some sort of regulation of that real estate industry, because things are at a level where artificial inflation of prices, the market ran away for the last 5 to 10 years. And it's now very, very expensive for even the ordinary citizen to qualify, even for low-cost government housing. is there a plan to apply a certain level of regulation to the incentives that have been provided?
Yeah, well, actually, precisely, that's precisely one of the things we expect to be addressed as part of this entire process that we're going through. First of all, let me say that, I mean, the incentives haven't been given willy-nilly. For example, we were very careful to say that when you're looking at land development, for example, that you will qualify on the basis of the approvals and so on. It's not that anyone can just go off and develop land and simply sell it and say that and reap all the profits without having established the right infrastructure in place. And that will be a precondition for getting the incentives that we spoke of, right? So the first thing we did was to ensure that we observe in all of our push for stimulating the economy and for stimulating growth, that we do in fact adhere to and observe what would be good practices and deliver good value for the consumer. The second thing is that by expanding the stock of homes that are available on the market, we expect that to play a role in keeping the prices under control. So in actually identifying where we would peg the benefit, we said, okay, we look at houses up to $1.5 million. And the reason for that is that we are looking to target the middle to low income up to a certain point. Of course, the very low income would have to be handled in a different kind of way. And that is where we would speaking to the 1.5% facility and so on that we were looking to introduce at some stage, which was not part of the budget, but which is another initiative that we have going. So, but we were looking at the people who are in the middle of the income bracket, and the 1.5 million is the sweet spot in the real estate market. That is where people are able to afford mortgages. The ordinary man in the street, based on their income levels of a joint household with two persons working, that is the spot where they can get a good quality home and can qualify for the mortgage. So that is why we established it at that level. And what we're expecting to come out of this are two effects really. The first is that what we want to see is an increase in supply, and the increase in supply is what would enable us to be able to maintain prices at a relatively stable level. And the second thing that we're expecting to see out of that is that the stimulation of the construction sector would add to the further stimulation of the economy and the multiplier effect on incomes throughout the economy. So those are the two things that we're expecting to see come out of it, and that will help to keep prices stable, we expect.
Ministers, we've got a question from the floor, and I believe it's coming from the food production sector.
Yes, pleasant good evening. Name is Shiraz Khan from the agriculture sector and Fighton. Minister Barrett, you had a campaign last year of buy local, right? At least we were looking to put 50% of what we eat on the table. But with the present situation with the VAT imposed on most of the products that is imported, now what drove the inflation in this country in June, July was vegetables by 42% and fruits by 45%, which raised the inflation up to 12.6%. Now if we want to continue with the introduction of buy local to people, and we are now putting VAT on imported pigtail and red beans and all of these things, right? We will defeat the purpose of the buy local. Additionally, I think if you want to attend to really deal with inflation, the farmers, vegetable and food production should be given that save that they're going to get from the VAT and pump more into agriculture and encourage, rather than we are faced and we are not sure of what's going to happen with the farmers and production. And additionally, we need to have something on that land tenure situation and the land policy, because the Minister Hawaii mentioned it in passing. He didn't deliberate on it or explain it until us at time when we could get that. Because because you stood with us against bulldozing, and we don't want to have these things happening again, because people are scared about production. I want to thank you for my time.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Khan. Let's get a response from the ministers.
Maybe I should take this question. The fact is that the reason that the Prime Minister made the announcement with regard to the removal of VAT was not to put additional strain on farmers of Trinidad and Tobago. It really was to alleviate the financial burden on the most disadvantaged in our society. And the reason that it was mentioned that it was a temporary measure was simply to allow the farming community in Trinidad and Tobago to build itself to a point where we could be self-sustaining. Now, if you look at a lot of the products that are being imported, that VAT is being removed from, you will see it's a number of canned foods, canned peas and so on, that we're not currently involved in growing in Trinidad and Tobago. The intention really is not to affect the growth or the production or the sale of any of the local foods, but to allow a certain time frame for the agricultural sector in Trinidad and Tobago to grow, but at the same time alleviating the strain on those who are most vulnerable. Now, I have to say this, and I don't normally criticize the media, as you know, Destiny, but there was a very mischievous headline on one of the newspapers today saying VAT coming back. And it was calculated to mislead. And I think, you know, reporters and journalists need to be a little bit more responsible at times and understand that their role and responsibility doesn't only extend to selling newspapers, but particularly the dailies, they need to understand that they're carrying a message from somebody or someone, or a message that is meant to send a certain signal to the population. And yes, we've said, Minister Hawaii said in his budget, it's a temporary measure. The manner in which it came across, it was almost as though we were trying to hide something, we were trying to slip something behind people's back and continue this whole issue about trust and so on. So I just wanted to put that on the table to say categorically that the intention really is not to in any way work against the farmers of Trinidad and Tobago. The intention really is just to alleviate temporarily the financial stress and strain on those who are most disadvantaged in society. And I also want to just add that I'm certain that we will continue to do everything we possibly can. And certainly, you know, I have every intention to continue to fight for farmers' rights and to ensure that farmers get their just dues, because I know how important it is for local consumption and local production to increase in Trinidad and Tobago.
We've got another question from the floor. Go ahead, please.
Hello, hi, Rubadiri Victor from the Artists Coalition of Trinidad and Tobago. So first of all, thanks for a couple things. The fiscal incentives, the 150%, is it really 3,000 US? 3 million US?
It is indeed, yes.
Excellent. The commitment to sign Carney and the zero rating of video and audio equipment. But we note with interest the consolidation of TTN, TT Film and the fashion industry into a kind of mega company with $50 million capitalization. This is on the backdrop of us winning very, very sophisticated things in the last two budgets, none of which were implemented. And the language of those things have not reoccurred this year. So we're a little worried that a very sophisticated program, which was won in the last budget as through the expert panel, the language of all those programs are no longer there. We don't know if that's now going to be taken up by the new super company or what. So that's a little worrying. And the executive arm, the vehicle for the implementation of those agendas was Arts Council, which was supposed to be operationalized under the Ministry of Planning, which there was $50 million set aside in the PSIP last year, but none spent on that. I think it was still spent on the 50th anniversary stuff, right? So we're just a little worried about those things because the sector is in crisis. At the same time, internationally, creative and cultural sectors, second largest industry on planet Earth, $1.3 trillion turnover, you know, and we're not seeing a coherent vision in terms of all the disparate elements going forward, as you might see, you know, when you talk about the manufacturing sector or the oil and gas. So what kind of commitments can we have going forward that the things that were won in the last 2 years can still be tabled, and that what is going to be the ambit of the new $50 million companies are going to take into consideration those items?
Thanks, Rubidere. Ministers?
Let me just say very briefly that you ought not to be concerned. In fact, you ought to be rejoicing. Coming back to Dr. Ramkisoon's earlier question with regard to inefficiencies, it's precisely for that reason that those three companies have been collapsed into the creative industries organization. There was a dissipation of resources, both financial and capital resources, and we felt that those resources were not focused appropriately. I'll give you one example that will give you an indication of what I mean. For the last 3 years, the film company and the entertainment company was given $88 million by the government of Trinidad and Tobago, of which $48 million went on salaries. Now, clearly, that was not the intention, and it can't be the intention. So we wanted to ensure that we had an organization that was properly focused, and that's why those organizations have been collapsed into one board, but 3 different areas to deal specifically with film, fashion, and entertainment. And we're now calling in people who know about these sectors, people who have been successful in them, people who understand them, people who have a passion for them, and getting advice from those people with regard to the way forward on that sector.
Let's get another question from the floor.
Donna Suku, President of the Agriculture Society of Trinidad and Tobago. Minister Barrett, this one is for you. And I hope that I'm talking to the converted tonight. Minister, you know, so often we have talked in the past about the disconnect in the agriculture sector. And when I read this budget statement and I look at what are the initiatives in agriculture, I'm wondering whether there's a disconnect in the whole government of Trinidad and Tobago. We talked about zero rating on food items, but have we taught or linked that to health and nutrition? Because when we zero rate everything, pancakes, syrups, and so on, we have to also consider that the health of our citizens is very important. And we want to, as you know, we have talked about creating a healthy nation of people eating healthy local food. So I hope that's oversight and it be reconsidered and you take into account the health of the nation's people when you talk about zero rating items, food items. Minister, this one I hope is really a typo error. I heard on Tuesday morning you mentioned there was a typo error. Item number 4 under agriculture, where you talked about the Ministry of Food Production and the government of, through the government of Trinidad and Tobago, an initiative with the government of Guyana to develop large farms in Guyana. We have a budget here that is based on stimulating growth and generating prosperity. But when we go into these kind of investment in Guyana, we are overlooking the fact that Trinidad and Tobago still have thousands of arable agricultural lands. And why is it as a government we cannot develop hardcore initiatives, real policies to develop our local agriculture sector, develop our farmers and our people? Why is it we are looking to Guyana? Have we considered when we go and develop agriculture in Guyana, and we have some issue, for example, like what happened in New York in September 11th, where we had nothing could have gone in or come out? How are we going to get the food out of Guyana? So I'm hoping that this one is a typo error, sir, and we really look at developing our own agriculture, our own farmers, and our own people.
Yeah, well, let me say that, first of all, dealing with the first part of the question, which is some of the foods may not really be, contributed to the best health of people. But nevertheless, they're acceptable foods, and it's a question of how the volumes that you ingest. I think if you eat pancake and syrup from time to time, I don't think that's a problem. The thing is that one of the Prime Minister, in looking at removing the VAT from food and zero rating the food items, it was an attempt to deal immediately with the issue of high food prices and the impact on the poor and on the general population. It is intended that we will take another look at our entire tax structure, and I did say that in the course of the budget speech, that in fact our entire tax structure is going to come under review. And in fact, our entire VAT structure will come under review at some point of time. And that is why the Prime Minister was, was very careful to say that, look, this will be a temporary measure, while one, we get certain initiatives in place to increase supply and to keep the price of food down, while, and once that gets done, that we look at the entire regime to determine how best we're going to move forward from here. So, I mean, for example, the Minister of Health has raised with me that perhaps things like soft drinks, which a lot of children drink and so on. He was pointing out to me that in New York, for example, Mayor Bloomberg has introduced some kinds of tariffs or maybe banned them from schools. I'm not quite sure what he did, but he was mentioning to me that some action was taken. And he said that at some stage when we, when we get an opportunity to revisit the entire regime, that he would hope that some of these things are taken into account. So it is not that the point you're making is lost on the members of government. We're very mindful of that particular issue. But we recognize that there's an immediate need, we'll deal with that, and then we will look at how do we reconstruct the entire regime of VAT. And in fact, in what I'm looking at, and I have already drafted a letter to the IMF asking for some assistance to take a look at our entire tax regime, which we haven't really revisited since 2005. So we want to build some coherence back into that, because a number of policies have changed and a number of incentives have been brought in at different points of time, and we need to streamline all of those and bring them back into some kind of proper framework. The other thing is the question, the second point is the point about Guyana. And that was done not just from a food point of view. We are looking at extending the range of economic activities that our citizens are involved in, not only in Trinidad, but outside of Trinidad and Tobago. For example, the NGC has been continuing to explore the opportunities to develop gas fields in countries in Africa, for example, and also to develop downstream industries in Nigeria, for example. Now, that doesn't mean that they're not going to continue to develop industry in Trinidad and Tobago. But the thing is that they see the opportunity because we have a bigger resource base. It's better to generate income from the resource base of the world than to just try and generate it only from Trinidad and Tobago. So we are looking at the opportunity to increase investments, to increase rates of return, to deal with the problems that we have here, of course. So, we need a supply of food here. And in Guyana, you can get certain economies of scale. So we're looking at that. But the United Fruit Company, which is a bad example to use, but nevertheless, they own huge tracts of land in Costa Rica and Guatemala and so on, where they had huge banana plantations and so on. It is not that in Florida they couldn't do the same thing, but they saw other opportunities that they would be able to take advantage of in other parts of the world, and they did that. And it's similar for us. We see the opportunity to take advantage of opportunities elsewhere that will help to add to the total store of value that we can create from the resources that we have here in Trinidad and Tobago, investing in other parts of the world. So we see it as more than just a single initiative to just deal with our farmers. It's really to generate a broader stream of income stream for Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you, Minister. We're going to take a break now. We're back, of course, in a short while. We're at the halfway mark in our live coverage on CTV and Talk City 91.9, the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2030. When we come back, we include some of your text messages. Remember, the keyword is forum. Type your question and or comment and send everything to 4913. We'll also include some of your telephone calls to 627-3760 after this break. This is the Caribbean Media Group, the state media of Trinidad Tobago, CTV, and 91.1 FM, bringing you live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Budget Forum 2013. Our panelists include Senator Honorable Larry Howai, Minister of Trade and Industry, and Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Vasant Bharat. Our moderators are Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon and our own Jesse May Vento.
Thanks very much, Paul. And we continue to take questions from the floor, as well as make provisions to take questions from you at home who are watching us and listening to us. You've got the number to call, and feel free to also text us. Remember, your keyword is forum. Type forum, leave a space, type your comment, and then send everything to 4913. Let's go back to the floor.
Hi, Mr. Minister. I would like to raise a point. My name is Imtiaz Ali from the Sandwood Business Association. You spoke about the unemployment rate of 4.75%, somewhere around there. You know, we in Samoa and in many other parts of the country, although there's unemployment, we are finding it difficult to get workers. The thing is, there are many people who are not employed but do not want to work because of the many handouts that are available in our country. And that's something, I know you spoke about reducing the subsidies, but the main subsidy that we need to reduce to save our country is the subsidy to people who do not want to work, and we have to get them back to work. And we need to get everyone aboard on that.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Ali.
Yeah, well,
Minister.
Yeah, well, Imtiaz, what we've done is that we have, I've had discussions with the Minister of Housing on the whom the CPEP program falls. And he's very clear in his mind. He's saying, look, as long as it is that the private sector has an interest there, we can enter into some kind of dialogue to move some of the burden off of his revenue stream and put that into the private sector. And that is why we had the allowance, and we had put in the allowance of 150% to employers, because that would, in fact, it was an incentive for us to enter into these discussions so that you can take some of the people that he has on that program, develop, train them, and employ them in your service, and you will get a 150% uplift on the cost of what you've just incurred. So we think it is a win-win situation for everyone, because he will get 100% off of his payroll, and you will get the needed employees that you have at a lower, and it will cost us less to get that done by giving a tax benefit than having that particular person on the payroll of the community enhancement program. So I think it is something that is something that is worth, and certainly I'd like to make a pitch here now that I have the opportunity for the private sector and for people who need labor, for us to enter into some kind of a discussion and dialogue as to how best we can transition people from one sector to the other, from the government sector into the private sector, and off of our payroll, and in a productive activities on your side of the business.
Let's go to the floor once more.
Good evening, Hassan Tom, President of the Trinidad Hotel, Restaurant and Tourism Association. First, I want to say thank you to the Minister for giving us an increase in the marketing budget for the THA and the Ministry of Tourism. I reviewed what is listed from the budget and the incentives in terms of investments, the government guarantee, and the upgrade maintenance program for hotels under 50 rooms. With the Tourism Investment Conference for 2013 on the doorstep, and the trust to improve the tourism sector for Tobago and hopefully for Trinidad, even though most of your contribution focused on Tobago. What sort of incentives will be put in place to attract investors to get these 1,000 rooms that you mentioned off the ground as soon as possible, seeing that the industry really needs increased quality room stock?
Well, I think the critical thing is that, let me back up a little bit. The fact is we do have a wide range of incentives that are available to potential investors. I think where we have some difficulty is in promotion of the destination. I think that needs to be addressed. There are some issues around labor that needs to be addressed. So there are a number of institutional areas that obstacles that we need to address as part of this entire process. And I think a big part of it is us entering into active engagement with potential investors, both locally, to start with, we like to focus locally first, but in addition to international investors who would want to come to a destination that is really untouched. It's really a different kind of destination. And as I said in the budget speech, you know, Trinidad has perhaps the widest range of offerings that one could find for the tourism product anywhere in the Caribbean. We have the most diverse cultural forms. We have the most diverse flora and fauna. Tobago is literally untouched. There is so much that we think that we can package, but what we need to do is put it together in a form that would allow us to be able to market it effectively to potential investors in the international community as well as locally. Now, in addition to that, I have told the Minister of Tourism that I am prepared to consider being a joint venture partner on a short-term basis in the tourism sector with any investor who has a good business plan that we're comfortable with, who is willing to invest in the sector. We are prepared to go in as a partner, get it up and running, and once it's at a stage that we think it's mature enough and it's sustainable enough, we would, you know, ideally for us, would want to list those shares on the local stock exchange or sell it to any local investors who may have an interest. But primarily, our first port of call would be to ensure that we could list it on the local stock exchange. So, so we are prepared to tackle it from both points of view. And really, I think the critical thing is to sit with the investors, sit with potential investors. Firstly, local. We'd really like local investors to be involved. But certainly, we have no objections to inviting foreign direct investment into that sector with a view to seeing the growth occur that we would like to see.
Gentlemen, we do have text messages coming in, and a gentle reminder for those of you at home, feel free to join the conversation any point by texting us your comments. Type the word forum, then leave a space, type your comment, and send everything to 4913. In terms of the texts that are coming in to us, a couple of questions with regard to the traffic situation and possible incentives for those who are bringing in hybrid and electric vehicles. Any thoughts about that at all, Minister, in the future?
Yes, we started some, we actually had a framework we were seeking to put into the budget relating to that. But after some consideration, we realized that we needed to do some more work on it before we could actually introduce it into the budget. And I expect that sometime during the course of this year, following our evaluation, we would then be in a better position to make a determination as to what exactly we're prepared to do in that area. But I would want to say it is under active consideration.
Well, let me just add to that,
Yes.
Destiny. With regard to the traffic situation, there's a significant amount of infrastructural work that's taking place starting in 2012-13 with regard to roads, the road network. For example, we're looking to start an access from Cocorite to Chagaramas. We're looking to build a highway from Kumoto to Sangre Grande. We are looking to dual the Rivulet Road leading to Point Lisas, which is a major cause of congestion. So we're looking to free up, we're looking to put more infrastructure in place to be able to free up the flow of traffic across the country. And we have several such infrastructural projects, again, that will start in 2030.
Well, Minister, one of the bugbears about the budget is that these promises are made, and in the following year, we have no explanation as to why the major ones, at least, did not happen.
Yes.
So we have the example of the San Fernando to Point Highway, or we have in the last budget the other two large items, the Carousel plant that was mentioned and the AUM plant. And in this budget, we did not hear anything about these projects.
Yes.
So is it the case that we are going to hear about these projects that are going to start, that are going to get things going in this economy, but next year comes and we don't hear about them, they don't get started? Where are we? What are we
Let me just touch on two of those projects. The Carousel project, which has halted temporarily because of environmental issues. There has been an environmental claim from the same group that is protesting against the highway, that there are issues with putting a plant of that nature in the area in which it is. Now, they don't have an issue with the product itself or the manufacture of the product. They've got an issue of the location of where it is. So that is halted temporarily. Okay. The other project, which is the AUM project, that is a project, of course, as you would know, in a joint venture with a company called CEL out of Europe. And what has happened is that that company was in litigation with the government of Trinidad and Tobago. They're in arbitration at the moment with regard to an existing project. Okay. And as a direct result, until the arbitration matter is settled, and it's currently ongoing, the AUM2, they're not prepared to start the AUM2 project until that arbitration is complete, simply because their bankers feel that whilst they're in litigation or in arbitration with the government of Trinidad and Tobago, they ought not, they feel uncomfortable lending them or on lending the funds at this point in time. So those are two projects that are they've not stopped. They're ongoing, and it's probably the reason why it wasn't mentioned in the budget.
Well, and what of the Point Fortin highway, Minister?
Maybe Minister Howe can answer that one.
Okay. It's moving. I mean, you know, the work is going on. As you know, we've had a reroute movement, which has created some issues, and of course there are some land settlement claims which are under review at the moment. We've come up with some solutions. We've identified where the squatters could be, how they can be removed and where they will be placed. Cabinet has approved the payments to people who would need to be moved, or the settlements, I should say, because the settlement may involve actually providing land rather than actually cash. So there are other arrangements like that. So I'll use a broader term like settlement, right? But the thing is that is under, it's being addressed at the moment, and we are moving full speed ahead to ensure that that project continues, because there are huge penalties associated with, you know, some of the stoppages that we've experienced.
Minister Hawaii, a couple of text messages have come in addressed to you, looking at the issue of improving tax collection and possibly improving the number of staff involved in that exercise.
Yeah, actually, you know, I've made a commitment to the Board of Inland Revenue, and I've told the chairman, look, you know, I am prepared to increase her staff by up to 100 persons over the next 3 years in order to ensure that she has the collection capability so that we can achieve the objectives that we want to achieve as far as the collection of revenue is concerned. There are other institutional measures which we will be seeking to put in place to address that particular matter. But it is under ongoing review by us, but certainly I have given the chairman a specific commitment that we are prepared to provide the staff that she needs in order to ensure that she can achieve the targets that she has. And probably I should publicly thank her. She told me on Monday when I read the budget that she had exceeded her budget for collection by $2 billion this year, so I would want to congratulate her for that. Yeah.
A couple text messages. One, looking at the issue of GATE, how much does government expect to save by reducing the GATE subsidy from 100 to 50 to 100% based on students' needs?
I haven't quantified that as yet. What we've identified, because we need to identify, before we could fully quantify it, we need to be able to get an understanding of the breakout of the different students and their needs, and where exactly they fall within the overall socioeconomic brackets. But the thing is that the very important message I wanted to send there, not so much some of those specifics, which we will, the Minister of Tertiary Education will deal with, specifically with the individuals, and more information will come out during the course of the debate. And I should add in connection with the questions that Ronald had raised, that the Minister of Energy will address some of those issues during the course of the debate. And deliberately, I had left some of these issues for the line ministers to address. And in some cases, I said in my speech that the line minister will address those issues. And the reason I did that is that I don't want to give ministers a freebie, so to speak. I think line ministers should be accountable to the population for what they have, what they have done, right? And it's not because I want to put anybody on the spot. That's not so. I think they themselves are keen to be able to communicate. In fact, in writing the budget, if I had taken all the recommendations that I got, every minister sent me a few pages, I would have had like a 200 or 300 page budget document to read, which was, from my perspective, impractical. And some ministers felt a little bit peeved that I didn't say enough about them and what they were doing in the budget. But I thought that it was best to leave that for the debate, where they can speak specifically to their area and address what they've done during the course of the past year and what they're going to do next year. But also, there is an issue of accountability, personal accountability of the minister for what he or she is doing in there. So the Minister of Science and Technology, the Minister of Tertiary Education, will address a number of the issues coming out of the GATE program. But the important message for me to send in the budget is that we are taking a look at GATE. We are committed to increasing the amount, if necessary, that we commit to GATE, because we are committed to getting to a 60% enrollment rate from the point of view of graduates coming out of secondary school and getting exposed to some form of a tertiary education. We are committed to doing that, and if it requires an uplift in investment, we're prepared to do that. But the most important point for me is that we get value for money. What we saw coming out of the GATE experience is that in 2007, the GPA average of a student was 2.39. By 2011, it was 2.19. In fact, when I looked at the numbers year after year, it was a consistent decline and steady decline in the GPA average for students who are enrolled. There are students who enroll and they try out the course and they don't like that, so they enroll for something else because they don't have to pay for it, right? They're not under the same pressure to pass the exam because they could get a repeat and we would pay for that, right? So I think it was very important for us to send a strong message that they need to tighten up, the students themselves, but also that the population at large understands that our commitment and our resolve to ensure that there's value for money in whatever programs we institute for the benefit of the society as a whole.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're going to take a short break. We're live at the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. When we come back from this break, we'll factor in your telephone calls. 627-3760 will be the number, and you'll get to interact with our panel right here after this break. Welcome back to CTV and Talk City's live coverage of the Ministry of Finance and the Economy's Post-Budget Forum 2013. Don't forget the number to call, 627-3760. You can also send some text messages, the keyword being forum. Send everything to 4913, including your comments, and we'll be taking more calls from, of course, our live audience here. Our panel includes Finance Minister, Senator the Honorable Larry Hawaii, Minister of Trade and Industry, and Minister in the Ministry of Finance, Vasant Barath, a senior economist with Republic Bank's Economic Intelligence Unit, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, and CNMG's Jesse Mayvento.
Thanks very much, Paul. And our members here, our audience here, they are very much interested in getting their questions through to the ministers. Let's take another question from the floor.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Mikey Joseph, immediate past president of the Contractors Association. Minister Hawaii, I want to congratulate you on your first budget presentation. And I want to say that I would be one of your biggest fans. But people who I admire have a problem because I'll also be one of your biggest critics if they need be. But right now I'm one of your biggest fans. I really like your change in style where you're talking about 12-year development plan and 15 and 16-year development plan, because I think the problem with the progress of the country have to do with the 5-year development plan. And if we can change our thinking, maybe we'd really move forward. And I have several issues. I definitely may not be able talk about all of them.
Your top two.
Top two. All right. One is enabling the industry by having proper legislation enacted. What is needed to our sector directly, by our sector directly, is the Contractor Registration and Licensing Act with a proper lien law to bring proper regulation of the industry and to improve the performance of the players in the industry and to give them the security needed to ensure that they could continue to develop. Also, what is needed right now, the state is suffering from a lot of inefficiency and leakage of funds through improper practice. And what is needed to fix that is proper procurement legislation. Now, we know that you all have agreed to enact that legislation, but what we don't accept is that what you're enacting is not totally what is required to really bring effective corporate and other governance into government. And if we are to do that, we are asking, I'm begging on behalf of the JCC and the other members that you all consider carefully our proposed legislation, which we believe would really enable our country to grow, especially at this time where we have scarce resources and a lot of leakage.
Gentlemen, before you answer, Mr. Joseph, let's just take a call very quickly from Diego Martin. Diego Martin, thank you for holding so patiently. You're on the air.
All right, thank you, Jesse. I have a little problem. I don't know if the minister mentioned it before and I didn't hear it. They spoke about CPEP and URP generating employment. But I hear nothing about cooperative and credit union, cooperative credit union, cooperative agriculture, cooperative fisheries. Those are money making and public for people interest societies that could help generate funds to keep them up and give them cheap food and put money in their pocket and help the society. I have heard nothing about it.
Okay, Diego Martin, let's give the ministers a chance to respond. Thank you so much. Ministers.
Yeah, well, actually, I did make a passing reference, and I do apologize for that. But again, a budget is something that, you know, in a sense, it's not possible to say everything in the budget. And we did make a passing reference to the Credit Union Act being one of the priorities that I had on the legislative agenda for this year. But the point that is being made, I think, is a broader point than just regulation and legislation. It's a question, I think what the caller is saying is that there is the potential for development of business out of the cooperative sector. And that is something that actually we had a discussion about yesterday, because in the budget, we did make a passing reference also to the SME sector. And one of the issues that have been challenging us is the fact that we've made a lot of investments in things like NEDCO, in the venture capital fund, in all the front, you know, the business, small business development company and so on, all in an attempt to get this small business going, and it hasn't worked. And it strikes me as someone from the financial services sector that the answer to this is not more money just being put into there. There's something else that is missing in the construct that is required to make small business effective. And one of the solutions we see is really that the use of a cooperative mechanism to help us to achieve that. And then what are some of the initiatives we need to put in place to make that happen? Because we have a longer tradition of cooperative framework in Trinidad and Tobago, even from the very informal SUSU network, right through to the more formal actual cooperative credit union societies and so on. So we do have that kind of a structure in place, and the pooling of resources of small businesses may give them the opportunity to survive on a better basis. So one of the things that we had under active consideration yesterday is how can we now engage in a discussion with the cooperative movement to see if we can find a solution to the SME problem that we've identified.
I'm not sure which one of you ministers would like to tackle Mr. Joseph's question, contribution on procurement.
Yeah, well, what had happened, I did meet with Mikey and his team, and the point was made, and it was not lost on me. It was raised that the procurement legislation is being looked at by the Ministry of Planning. So the matter was raised with the Minister of Planning, and I did request that it be given a level of priority. One of the difficulties we have is, of course, saying, well, okay, here is a special interest group, give us a particular construct, and we say, okay, yes, so let's go ahead. And I know that is not what Mikey is intending to say. It's just to make sure that the public understands the approach that we take, right? And therefore, what the minister has told me is that he has sought to get a consultant who can help him to take an independent look at what we have received, as well as some of the other submissions that we have also received, to ensure that we could construct something that makes sense. So he is in the process of completing that review at the moment, and I expect that that should be completed. You know, we should be in a position to move forward on this particular matter early next year. But of course, from here, I think it has to go to Cabinet, then it goes to LRC, and then there are a number of other processes that it has to go through before it becomes legislation. But I think we should be in a position to propose something, and there's some level of consultation that has to take place. So I'm expecting that we should be in a position to table something to at least the Cabinet by early next year.
Ministers, we have to head to the phone lines again, as Santa Flora has been waiting patiently. Good evening to you, Santa Flora. Thank you for being so patient. You're on the air.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Well, concerning the budget, I think the budget was a very good budget. There's one area that I'm looking at is concerning the revenue collection pertaining to custom and excise department. Is there anything will be done concerning like overhauling the system and implementing some new system where revenue will be able to be collected as supposed to be?
Thank you very much, Santa Flora. Thank you so much for your question. Before we let you answer that, let's just take another question from the floor quickly. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ministers and members of the audience. My name is Gia Gaspar Taylor, and I'm from the Network of Rural Women Producers, Trinidad and Tobago. I want to thank the minister for, both ministers, as a matter of fact, for supporting the Rural Development Network and rural development. I also want to say that there are three things that I want to make mention of here today. Three events that take place in October. On the 13th of October will be the International Day for Disaster Reduction, and on the 15th is the International Day for Rural Women, and on the 16th is World Food Day. Now, it's not my guess that these three events were set aside by the United Nations. I think one of the statements made by the United Nations was the fact that the World Food Day falls just after Rural Women's Day because of the impact that women, rural women specifically, have on food production. Now, mention was made about agriculture, and I wouldn't go in there, but I do want to say, because everyone has been after the minister yesterday about the Mango Festival and the mango products, which he eloquently expressed on television. And as such, people are asking the questions, okay, so now that we have that, where is the money? And this is my question.
Thank you so much. Minister.
Well, I'll leave that to the Minister of Food Production, but I would say that, you know, yeah, I am very, you know, certainly enthusiastic about what you've been able to achieve. You know, you've made a tremendous contribution. The Mango Festival is something that is unique to Trinidad and Tobago. The products that you produce are unique, and it certainly forms the basis of what could be a very vibrant small business industry, starting with local, you know, and I do hope you've patented a lot of the things that you've done, because I firmly believe that they're very, very, it is intellectual property. And you know, I know of no one else who has been able to elicit the type of range of products that you've been able to do out of the mango fruit itself. And I certainly want to congratulate you on the work that you've done in that regard. And certainly we will be prepared to engage in some kind of a conversation with you, together with the Minister of Food Production, in terms of how we move forward from here.
Gentlemen, before we take another question from the floor, we have
I just wanted to
yes?
just respond to that also. Just to remind you that at the Mango Festival last year, I did say to you that there was tremendous potential, but not a single entrepreneurs, and that very much in the methodology we were talking earlier about forming cooperatives. You will remember I asked that you form some sort of cooperative, and I would personally assist you in getting your foot into some of the larger supermarkets, because the capacity that each of your members had was not sufficient to be able to warrant a large supermarket taking your product or your produce on an ongoing basis. And I think that's the first step, to really get together, form some sort of a formalized, structured organization, and then, you know, further help can be given via that way in terms of market access.
Minister Barrett, perhaps you'd want to respond to Santa Flora with regard to customs and
yes,
excise issues.
I mentioned earlier that it takes about, on average, 19 days to clear a container through customs. According to the World Bank statistics, as far as the burden of customs on doing business is concerned in Trinidad, we rank 132nd out of 144 countries in the world. So we're down at the bottom of the ladder as far as that is concerned. So there's no doubt that there needs to be a rationalization of how customs operates. I did mention earlier on that we have the Asecuta systems that are now almost up and running. We have the single electronic window where documentation can be processed almost instantaneously. Really, it's always been a question of merging the two. I'm very fortunate that I happen to have a leg in either ministry, and therefore I'm able to basically read the RIATAC across both areas. And I have a commitment, as I said, for the integration of that system to take place at the end of October, thereby allowing the processing of documentation and the clearing of containers within 24 hours. So we should see a significant rationalization of that process, which should obviously reduce the costs involved in having to deal with customs and excise. I mean, obviously the cost of demurrage and rent and all other costs associated with it. And consequently, we should see our manufacturers, having lower costs to have to deal with.
We've got a caller holding on the line from Mayaro. Let's take that very quickly. Mayaro, thank you for being so patient. You're on the air. Hello, Mayaro, are you with us? We seem to have lost that call. Dr. Ramkissoon, you wanted some clarification in terms of where
yes.
the budget was actually being pegged, in terms of the
yes,
oil dollars?
Yes, if I might go back to a couple proposals in the budget. The first, there is a proposal in respect of the manufacturing sector, the removal, so-called new proposal of removing import duty on capital goods. Minister, I understand that that is, the way it is stated, is in fact something which exists at present. Do you wish to clarify that?
Yes, you're right. It's not a new measure. Essentially what the new measure is, and it may have been a slight mistake in the budget presentation, is that you will no longer require a minister's license for importation of plant and equipment for the purpose of manufacturing. So it makes the process a lot easier, removing all of the inefficiencies in the system with regard to having to apply for a minister's license.
Thank you for that explanation, Minister Hawaii. There has been a bit of discussion about what exactly is the price used for arriving at oil revenue. Is it $80 or is it $75? Could you clarify that for us?
Yeah, it's $80. We sent out an errata sheet the same afternoon. It is $80. What happens is that we use a basket of crudes to determine what is the value of the crudes that we will be using going forward in each fiscal year. The value of that basket of crudes is pegged at the values that peg that, the relative value to WTI would be about $5 above WTI.
That
so
is our price.
Yeah, yeah. So our price would be $80 when WTI is 75.
Okay.
So we know that people tend to track WTI. That's an indicator.
Yes.
So I was trying in the budget to say to people, look, this number, it becomes an area of concern if the WTI drops below 75.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So that people can, they'll be seeing this number, WTI, they're not seeing
The
where
80.
our basket of crudes is pegged. Right?
Just to clarify, WTI West Texas Intermediate.
Yes, sorry,
Yes.
West Texas Intermediate.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So the purpose behind we try to put it in a way that people could context that they could understand it properly,
Okay.
so that going forward, when they're looking at WTI on the screens, the television screens, and they're seeing a number, they know we're $5 above that. And during the course of last year, actually our prices came in at closer to $100 than to the price that we had actually budgeted for.
Okay.
We've got another question from the floor. I believe it's from the poultry sector. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good afternoon to the panel. Mr. Bernard Toledo, Biotelevision and Radio. My name is Robin Phillips, Poultry Association, Bernard Toledo. The first thing we in the poultry industry want to do is thank the government for their support with the implementation of the surcharge. We eagerly await the legal notification. The second thing we want to follow up on Mr. Bharat's statement that the VAT removal is not intended to hurt local farmers. So I would expect if Argentine, the farmers will benefit with the removal of VAT in Trinidad and Tobago by the sale of Argentine corn beef, that Trinidad and Tobago poultry farmers will benefit, at least at the supermarket level, with the removal of VAT on products like rotisserie chicken. The third point I want to make, which is really the most salient point, and it follows up on the call from Santa Flora, is we see the Customs and Excise Department as part of our Border Protection Agency. And we have three concerns. The first one is fiscal. And this, Minister Hawaii will be very interested in these numbers. The savings estimate on the removal of the subsidy on the premium gas, I heard via radio, is estimated in the vicinity of $100 million. Now, if that is significant, we in the poultry industry recommend that we look at the level of duty-free chicken that is entering the market under what we consider very suspicious reasoning. About a third of the imports coming into the country, which works out to be 5.5 million kilograms for the year 2011. If duty was charged on that, especially if you add the surcharge, it will work out to be somewhere between $70 and $100 million. So that's the fiscal part of it. Second part is health and nutrition. We were advised, this is the poultry industry, that in a meeting with the Customs and Excise, that one of the reasons the imported chicken enters the Trinidad and Tobago market at low prices is because, quote unquote, it is bought close to the expiry date. This was stated to us 3 times in one single meeting. Our concern is a lot of that chicken ends up where? It ends up in state enterprise institutions, school feeding. How many of our children are now consuming chicken that is near or past expiry date based on that purchasing decision, or entering our health institutions where patients may have compromised immunity and facing or having to consume chicken close to the expiry date.
Okay, thank you so much for your comments. I just want to give the ministers time to respond to some of what you said, because we're actually very, very close to wrapping up.
I have one single point.
Really quickly.
The last one, again, following up on it, is a border protection. There is now illegal chicken coming in from sources not approved by the chief veterinary officer into Trinidad and Tobago. We have pictures, and we have been accused of photoshopping. So now what we have done, is we have actually purchased the chicken, which we have in our freezers to show whoever is interested in seeing it.
Okay, ministers.
Well, just very quickly, I have met with the Poultry Association regarding many of these matters. The issue of additional duties to be placed on imported chicken obviously is an issue that has to be dealt with, not just by us alone in Trinidad. It's a quoted issue. I've explained that to the Poultry Association. We go to quoted at the end of November, I think early December, and we'll put that case forward to them. The other issue of, I think it's chicken from Chile, is it, coming into Tobago where it was found, I have said to them that, and they're aware, this is an issue of a leakage at customs, clearly, for that to have happened. And hopefully with the work we're doing with rationalization of the customs and excise, we should be able to clear up all of those issues.
We've got a text message here that's a bit related to that issue. Someone asking here, what's being put in place to stop the groceries from putting higher prices to the foods in store to make up for the loss of the VAT?
Simply that we will have buy-in from the Supermarkets Association, from the TTMA, and from the Chambers of Commerce, who I met with yesterday. And we are all committed to ensuring that the market itself will regulate. So if, for example, a Hilo is selling at the old price and True Value down the road is selling at the new price, the market itself will regulate by the fact that the consumer will shop where the price is lower. And if we get the generality of supermarkets across the country to commit to reducing the prices, then the odd ones that are not will certainly lose custom. Plus, of course, remember, we've still got the Prices Council, who will do the monitoring of the of prices across the board.
There has been a criticism that the Prices Council has been a toothless bulldog.
But what the Prices Council will do, remember, the Prices Council is just a monitoring unit. It's not an enforcement unit. It's just a monitoring unit to alert the population of what prices exist across the country. It's then left to the consumer to determine if they wanted to shop at the supermarket with a higher price or the ones at the lower prices. But I think once it starts to filter into the marketplace, it'll become the general pricing.
We've got a question here about the subsidy on the fuels. Someone making the point that it may turn out to be more expensive for us to not remove the subsidy across the board, as opposed to just focusing on premium. And environmentalists are concerned that people are being penalized for using a clean fuel. Any comments?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me say that it is a matter that we did consider in looking at the whole question of the removal of the subsidy and how far we should go. And there are also some legislative issues and regulatory issues that we also need to take into account in terms of how we move forward. And I know up to late on Sunday, the technocrats in the Ministry of Finance were going through, together with the Ministry of Energy, some of the issues involved in trying to make things work the way we would have liked them to work. But when we looked at it, there are certain vehicles, a certain percentage of vehicles that must use premium gasoline. And we expect that they will continue, and those tend to be the high-end vehicles. Although I am aware that there are one or two that are not high-end, which would be some of the foreign used, imported, which the manufacturer specific or recommendation is that you should use premium. But those would be generally in the minority. The numbers that we saw was that about 9% in volume, by volume, of the consumption of gasoline was premium, of which accounted for 6% of the subsidy, because the 9%, the subsidy for premium was less than for the others, right? So I think that's what the call is saying, so that to the extent that you have a switch from premium to super, it's more expensive for me. It's cheaper for me to keep the person on premium than to remove the premium. But we did the estimates of what would happen as a result and how much fallout we expected. And that is why, you know, the subsidy is about $4 billion a year. 6% of that is about 240 million TD dollars. And my figure is, you know, a little less than $100 million. So we estimated that the fall off from premium and the additional subsidy that would be picked up on the other side would cost us, you know, in that kind of vicinity, about 140 million or so. So we did make some provision for that in the estimates that we had come up with. We also did not actually include the number formally in our revenues. There was one question by a reporter today where he indicated that he had seen a number, but I haven't been able to locate that number, and I don't know where he may have seen that number, but certainly in my discussions at the ministry, to see if anyone could locate the number, we weren't able, that reporter would have seen, we certainly weren't able to find that. So it's nowhere in the revenue estimates that we would have provided to the population. So the thing is that yes, we are aware there will be some fall off, and we would like to move to certainly increase the price across the board, because I have to say, at the cost that we're looking at, I was looking at some of the numbers, and on an annual basis, I can build probably 3 small hospitals, about 20 schools costing about $30 million each, and give a 10% increase to the public service with 1 year's fuel subsidy. So on an annual basis, I'm giving up 3 hospitals and about 20 schools, and the cost to us of doing that, and the cost to the population. So we need to make sure that the population understand that this is a conscious decision that they would like to make, that we would like to keep the subsidy rather than have these additional goods or services, or alternatively, have a lower level of debt going forward in the future, and that they are making certain kinds of decisions. And we therefore need to have an education program going as far as that is concerned with the general public. So there's an understanding and an engagement between the government and the civil society in arriving at some kind of an agreement on that. But having said that, we recognize the importance of closing off some of the issues. And a big leakage is a leakage that goes into the marine environment, boats and so on. And one of the things that we intend to do over as a priority is to prioritize that part of the diesel subsidy and start looking at that so that we could probably fast track the implementation of some kind of a mechanism to deal with the subsidy as far as the external leakage is concerned. And that will be part of the remit of the ministerial team that we spoke about in the budget. So that's one area that we will definitely look at, and we will definitely consider, and which is why we said during the course of 2013, it will be a matter that will be under continuing review. The thing is that we also have, and I should mention, the CNG alternative that we're looking at, which is a cleaner, greener alternative. We have in mind a plan to roll out about 62 stations. We expect that will probably be a 5-year program. There are some ways we think we might be able to fast-track elements of it. The business plan is well developed. We know where the funding is coming from. We've identified that. We would like certainly to have the private sector to be part of that, but I suspect it will be difficult to have the private sector involved until we actually remove the fuel subsidies, because if you don't, as long as you have the fuel subsidies, there would not be an incentive to convert to CNG. So there are a number of things that we have to balance, and if we decide to go that route, not if we decide, we will build out the CNG station. Whether the gradual removal is tied to that or some other mechanism is something that still needs to be worked out. But nevertheless, the thing is that once we start that process, we certainly would like to have the private sector involved, and we will definitely be seeing one way or the other the removal of the subsidy, which is a key element of me being able to meet my fiscal targets within the time frame that I have identified.
We've come down to the last few minutes of this evening, and we can't let you go without letting you explain as quickly as you can your thinking behind the approach you're taking to tie up the CLECO and HTU situation.
Yes, well, that is, it is something I certainly want to put behind us. It's been a sore point with the population, with the nation as a whole. It's cost us $20 billion approximately. So I expect that the CLECO Investment Trust, the documentation has been prepared. I am told that the prospectus has been prepared. I still have to review it. We expect that the SEC should, give us a relatively quick turnaround on it. So I'm expecting that we should be able to establish the trust and issue the prospectus by November 1st. with respect to HCU, I said in the budget that we had already started the payments for those who are under 75,000, and $60 million worth of payments have been made, and I expect that we would be in a position to start the payments, start the payments of the tranche of over 75 by November 1st.
It's come to our attention that there are some issues left over from Clico Investment Bank, Minister.
Yes, I'm aware that there are still some persons who were not included as part of the overall settlement arrangement. I had not focused on that. My focus was really on trying to get this aspect of the 75,000 of the EFP holders out of the way. As soon as we get that out of the way, I'll certainly turn my attention to what the residual element of it is like, and whether there's any basis for giving any consideration to that. But given the fact that it's cost us over $20 billion, and given our fiscal deficits, and given the increasing debt to GDP levels that we have, we have to give very careful consideration to whether we want to add any further to the cost of this particular bailout.
Dr. Ramkissoon, any final questions from you?
Yes, and it relates to the last question, point the Minister makes in respect of the deficit. Minister, a deficit implies that you most likely would have to borrow funds. If we continue borrowing for the next 4-5 years, as you indicate, it's by 2016 you hope to have a balance. What is that going to do to the debt profile of Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, well, the thing is that we budgeted deficits for the past 4 years, roughly. And if you abstract from Clico, the debt to GDP level didn't go anywhere. Now, part of the reason for that is a number of things. It's partly accounting. For example, we do have a difference between where we peg the price of oil and where it actually comes in at. We also have issues around other income that comes in but may not come in as a revenue through the top line, but it goes straight to the consolidated fund. So we fund out of some of those things. So that the entire number is something that one has to look at carefully. The other thing is that we've done a lot better than we had expected to do in each of the preceding years, in that even though we had budgeted a specific deficit, we've never really hit those numbers. We usually come in below that. My expectation is that this year, assuming that we come in close to that number, we will have a debt to GDP level of over 49% by the end of this year. And by the end of the fiscal period, it's probably going to be in the region of about 56% or thereabouts. But I expect that that is a reasonably manageable number. And that is using a fairly conservative growth rate projection. I expect that we probably would show about a 2.5% rate of growth, which means that next year the deficit will be somewhere around 6.5 billion, which will be the number, assuming that we don't do other things in the meantime. And to the extent that we are able to speed up the process of bringing the subsidy under control, the fuel subsidy under control, that would also accelerate the timelines, but I haven't factored that in to the numbers that I'm referring to. So I think, I had to make some judicious bets in terms of where things are and what I focus on. And for me, the very most important thing for me was to ensure that there was growth in the economy. Because of course, once we get growth, the denominator increases, and therefore the debt to GDP actually comes down. So
Minister, we've actually run out of time this evening.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I'm so sorry about that. Yeah. Thank you so much for being so gracious and allowing us to quiz the both of you and being so forthcoming with your answers. We are very grateful to everyone who sent in their text messages as well as called in to the session this evening, and to all those members of civil society who came out and formed part of the live audience and brought us questions from the floor. Thank you very much, Dr. Ramkissoon, for being my partner in crime this evening. And Paul, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, and let's ask our live audience to give them a round of applause, please. We'd like to thank Jesse Mayvento, Dr. Ronald Ramkissoon, and the Minister of Finance, Mr. Larry Hawaii, Minister Larry Hawaii, and also Minister Vasan Bharat for being with us. We want to thank you all for participating through your text messages and your call. And remember, CTV continues our live coverage of the ramifications and debate this coming Friday from 10 a.m. In the House, live right here on CTV and the CN Caribbean Media Group. We want to thank you for viewing. On behalf of our entire team here, good night.